A German Shepherd is about to be euthanized as doctors prepare to inject the drug. The dog's body curled up, its muscles tensed, and it let out a desperate howl as if begging to see its owner, who had been its companion for more than a decade on rescue missions, but did not know that its owner was also on a hospital bed with his last days. What happened next shocked everyone. Lay sprawled on the stainless steel table of the Mammoth Mountain Veterinary Clinic, his once majestic coat now matted and damp. Flecks of ice clung to his fur as if refusing to let go of the memory of snow-packed slopes. Even in his weakened state, Rocky's nostrils twitched, catching familiar scents: the stringent odor of antiseptics, the faint smell of disinfectant-laced water, and perhaps the lingering aroma of pine that still clung to him from the last mission. His ribs rose and fell in shallow waves. Every breath he took echoed like a soft rasp, a struggle. The fluorescent lights overhead cast sharp reflections on the metallic equipment arranged around the examination table. Dr. Collins, the clinic's chief veterinarian, stood with a syringe in hand, gazing down at Rocky with heavy eyes. In all those years of service, Dr. Collins could not recall a case that gripped his heart so profoundly. This was Rocky, Mammoth's pride and joy, the avalanche rescue dog who had, for over a decade, combed through storms, trudged through waist-deep powder, and pulled survivors from icy graves. A gentle hush fell over the small exam room. Veterinary assistants stand around, uncertain yet dutiful. They had prepped the intravenous lines and readied themselves for the possibility that euthanasia was the only humane recourse. Rocky's heartbeat was faint, irregular, and his lungs rattled as if each inhalation might be his last. Time was of the essence. Keeping him alive in this state might only prolong his suffering. As Dr. Collins lowered the stethoscope to Rocky's chest, he heard a faint, faltering rhythm that lacked its old vigor. His professional instincts warred with the compassion in his heart. Euthanasia would spare the dog from more agony. Yet, something made the vet hesitate. Perhaps it was the look in Rocky's eyes, as the dog's gaze drifted from the equipment to the door. Rocky's eyelids fluttered as if searching, yearning for someone. With a strained whimper, he let out a soft cry, quiet, but weighted with need. He was looking for Ethan, his longtime partner and best friend. The heartbreak of the moment lay in the fact that Ethan was not there to answer Rocky's plea. Instead, Ethan lay in a hospital bed in a nearby town, tethered to IV lines and a ventilator. He had survived the same avalanche that had nearly claimed Rocky. But survival is a term that downplays the severity. Ethan's injuries included a severe spinal complication and pleural effusion that made breathing a Herculean effort. While Rocky battled from the veterinarian's table, Ethan could barely move at all. Dr. Collins swallowed thickly as he remembered the nurse's phone call from just an hour earlier. Ethan was in critical condition. The fall had compressed 2 vertebrae in his lower spine, leaving doctors concerned about permanent nerve damage. Coupled with fluid in his lungs, his condition had quickly deteriorated. It was nothing short of a miracle that Ethan had even made it through the night. Traveling any distance in this state seemed impossible, especially given the short time window Rocky had left. Saw Rocky lying on the table, Doctor. Collins found his mind wandering to Rocky's extraordinary past, 12 years of service, each year filled with daring rescues in some of the most treacherous winter conditions on Earth. The avalanche rescue team in Mammoth was small, but mighty. It had to be, given how frequently tourists and locals alike underestimated the mountain's perils. Each winter, the region's heavy snowfall transformed the landscape into a wonderland and a potential death trap. Skiers went off trail, climbers lost their footing, storms raged without warning. Rocky had been the answer to countless prayers whispered beneath a blanket of snow. His finely tuned nose could detect the faintest scent of a human trapped under layers of ice. With unwavering determination, he would dig for hours. Where others tired, Rocky persisted. Years of specialized training made him the team's secret weapon, and he never let them down. Dr. Collins remembered the stories told around the local diner. How Rocky once led Ethan to a mother and child stranded in a buried cabin. How he'd barked at the exact spot where rescue workers discovered an unconscious hiker. If not for Rocky, that hiker would have frozen to death. Each recollection underscored the dog's legacy. And now here he was, battered and near the end, but still valiantly flicking an ear or whining softly whenever someone mentioned Ethan's name. Rocky's medical chart detailed the full extent of his ailments. His heart was in poor shape, enlarged from age and years of stress. The left side of his torso bore the brutal bruise of a falling rock that had struck him during the avalanche. Internal bleeding had been mostly contained, but the damage to his lungs from the harsh cold was irreversible. The slightest exertion left him wheezing, and it was a miracle he had survived even this long after the rescue mission. Suddenly, Rocky's body stiffened. His legs twitched in a convulsive spasm. Alarmed, Dr. Collins ran over to the table, instructing an assistant to hold Rocky's head while another readied an anti-seizure medication. The dog's jaws quivered, his pupils dilating. This seizure was mild compared to some Dr. Collins had witnessed in other animals, but it was enough to confirm the severity of Rocky's condition. His entire system was shutting down. In that moment, each staff member realized that euthanasia might be the kindest path. Letting Rocky linger in this state seemed cruel. There was no guarantee Ethan could make it, nor could they predict if Rocky would slip away in an excruciating seizure. But the heartbreak was undeniable. Rocky's soulful brown eyes still darted toward the door, as if refusing to give up hope that Ethan would walk in. Members of the Mammoth Mountain Rescue Team began arriving at the clinic, each one wearing a somber expression that reflected the gravity of the situation. These were the men who had worked side by side with Ethan and Rocky for years. They recalled how Ethan would lead Rocky into the field whenever someone was missing, shouting simple commands that Rocky understood like a second language. Ethan had a special high-pitched whistle that signaled Rocky to begin sniffing. Together, they formed a legendary duo that brought battered, frozen victims home to safety. Rescue workers in the waiting room shared stories among themselves. One recalled a time a young child was lost on the slopes at dusk, and how Ethan had stayed out in a howling blizzard for 9 hours, trusting Rocky's nose. They found the boy, nearly unconscious, but alive. Another remembered the countless nights they slept side by side in the rescue station's bunks, Ethan gently brushing the snow off Rocky's coat, the dog grateful for a warm place to rest. Each story underscored the unbreakable bond between man and dog. At Mammoth General Hospital, Ethan lay on a stark white bed, tubes and wires snaking around his body. His eyelids fluttered as he drifted between bouts of consciousness and morphine-induced haze. Every breath he took felt like drawing shards of ice into his lungs. Fluid had built up, and the doctors were racing to stop an infection from setting in. A rigid brace stabilized his spine after surgery. At times, all Ethan could do was blink, try to swallow, and pray for a full breath of air. A rescue team member approached quietly, standing near the bed. With gentle caution, he relayed the news. "Rocky is getting weaker, Ethan. The vet says it might be tonight." His words trailed off, but the meaning was clear. If Ethan wanted to say goodbye, it needed to happen soon. Ethan's eyes snapped open, a clarity surging through his body. Rocky. The name alone was enough to stir him from the edges of sedation. He tried to push himself up, ignoring the searing pain along his spine. The monitors beeped in alarm, and a nurse rushed over, pressing him back down. Ethan's voice came out a scratchy rasp, but the intensity behind it was unmistakable. "I have to see Rocky." His friend frowned, shaking his head. "Ethan, you're too hurt. Just let us." "No!" Ethan's voice cut through the hush of the hospital ward. "Call an ambulance. Take me to Rocky." Doctors and nurses surrounded Ethan's bed, all urging him to remain still. With the fluid in his lungs, any movement at this point could be fatal. The surgeon on call warned him of a possible tear or internal bleed if he strained himself. But Ethan, with the air of a man who had survived countless storms, was adamant. "If I don't go, I'll regret it forever." His voice quivered with the effort, each syllable coaxing fresh waves of agony from his injuries. He had built up a formidable reputation as one of the bravest rescue workers in Mammoth, but now his eyes brimmed with tears. After a tense, whispered debate, a nurse stepped forward. She understood devotion, recognized that look of fierce loyalty in Ethan's face. "We'll arrange an ambulance, but you will have to sign a waiver," she said, her voice soft but firm. Ethan nodded, not hesitating for a moment. Back at the veterinarian's office, Dr. Collins stood with the euthanasia solution in his hand, each second feeling like a small eternity. No one wanted to watch Rocky suffer another seizure, but Dr. Collins also knew Ethan was en route. The news had come through a phone call from one of the rescue team members. "He's insisted on coming. He's in an ambulance now." A tear slipped from Dr. Collins' eye, glistening in the clinic's harsh light. He set the syringe aside. He leaned over Rocky, pressing a stethoscope gently to the dog's chest once more. Rocky's heart thudded irregularly, skipping beats, but it was still holding on. The dog let out a long, drawn-out whine, his cloudy gaze staring at the door again. As if on cue, the rescue team member repeated, "Ethan's on his way. Hang on, Rocky." Dr. Collins nodded, stepping back from the table. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, voice cracking as he addressed the staff. "We wait. I can't do it before Ethan arrives." A hush fell over the clinic, broken only by the faint beeping of monitors. The entire medical team, as well as the gathered rescue workers, watched Rocky with a mixture of dread and awe. It was as though the dog knew help was coming, and his vitals reflected a newfound steadiness. The arrhythmic pattern of his heartbeat became marginally more regular, and his breathing, although slow, seemed less dire. "How is this possible?" murmured one of the vet techs, her gloved hand resting on the edge of Rocky's table. His condition was spiraling. "Now it's stable?" Dr. Collins stood off to the side, quietly observing. "He's waiting," he whispered. "Rocky will wait. He will wait until Ethan gets here." In the ambulance, Ethan lay strapped to a stretcher as the vehicle barreled down a winding road. The paramedic checked his oxygen levels every few seconds, worried that the bumpy ride might aggravate his lungs. Wincing against the pain in his back, Ethan gripped the rails of the stretcher, sweat beading on his forehead. Each jolt of the road sent shockwaves through his spine, but the only words slipping from his cracked lips were, "Faster, please. Rocky is waiting." Outside, the winter sun peeked through swirling clouds, painting pale beams over the snow-draped valley. They were nearly at the clinic. The paramedics could see the building's outline in the distance. Inside the ambulance, Ethan's monitors beeped as his pulse climbed. He was surviving on adrenaline and love alone, it seemed. The paramedics had witnessed many acts of devotion, but something about Ethan's resolve was extraordinary. The ambulance pulled up to the Mammoth Mountain Veterinary Clinic at last. The moment the door swung open, rescue team members stepped in, carefully guiding the gurney out. They pushed Ethan through the clinic's double doors, the wheels squeaking on the floor tiles. The hush that had enshrouded the waiting area broke into a flurry of movement and gasps as people moved aside to let them pass. Inside the exam room, Rocky's tail gave the slightest of wags. The old dog, who had been listless for hours, suddenly blinked, ears perking up with a feeble but purposeful lift. The shift was so subtle that only a keen eye would catch it, but everyone present felt the electric change in the air. He knew Ethan had arrived. As Ethan was wheeled in, tears streamed down the rescue workers' faces. Even Dr. Collins, seasoned from years of work, found himself swallowing back a lump in his throat. The beeping monitors around Rocky's table merged with the mechanical hum of the respirator attached to Ethan. It was a symphony of fragility and love. They positioned Ethan's stretcher so he could reach out to Rocky. Despite the agony twisting his spine, Ethan lifted a trembling hand to rest on the dog's neck. Rocky's fur was damp and disheveled, but to Ethan, it was the most comforting thing in the world. His fingers gently traced the curve of Rocky's collar. The dog's eyes fluttered, focusing on Ethan's pallid face. If there was any doubt about their connection, it dissolved in that instant. "I'm here. You did a great job," Ethan said in a hoarse whisper. Every word came at a cost, but relief underpinned his voice. He had made it in time. He saw the dog that had saved so many lives, including his own. The clinic staff watched with folded hands, tears glimmering in the corners of their eyes. Few words could describe the depth of this bond. They had witnessed many goodbyes between humans and their beloved pets, but the intensity here was beyond compare. This was more than a pet-owner relationship. It was a partnership forged in the snowy wild, tested by the howling winds of countless storms, and proven time after time in rescues that bordered on the impossible. Rocky's breathing softened. He nuzzled closer to Ethan's hand, as though absorbing every last bit of warmth, every last reassurance. The dog's eyes glistened with recognition, and a soft whimper rose from his throat, half sorrow, half comfort. He was not alone. Minutes passed. Every minute is like a gift. The tension in the room was almost tangible, as though the entire clinic was holding its breath with them. Ethan, mustering every ounce of strength, leaned forward, ignoring the strangled cry of pain that shot up his spine. He pressed his face close to Rocky's ear, his voice a fragile murmur. "You're a hero." Ethan's lips trembled. "You can rest now." Rocky blinked slowly, as if to acknowledge Ethan's words. There was no frantic struggle, no final burst of panic. Instead, it was quiet acceptance. The dog's chest rose one last time and then fell gently, each second stretching into an eternity. His heartbeat, so precariously maintained up to this point, began to slow, the beeping on the monitors turning irregular. Ethan's tears slipped onto Rocky's fur, whose entire life had been devoted to saving others, now entrusted his last moments to the person he loved most. Surrounded by the hush of the clinic and under the watchful gazes of friends, the dog closed his eyes for the final time. His breathing tapered off into silence. No one spoke. The only sound was a single drawn-out beep from Rocky's monitor. Ethan's hand stayed on the dog's neck, the gentle contact never wavering. A wave of heartbreak swept the room, the finality of it all hitting like a sledgehammer. The staff, some with trembling chins, bowed their heads. Members of the rescue team held back sobs, shoulders quaking under thick winter jackets. Even Dr. Collins, normally composed, let out a small broken sob. Rocky was gone. In the stillness that followed, a soft moan escaped Ethan's lips. His eyes, still wet with tears, fluttered closed. The exhaustion of the journey, the throbbing pain in his back, and the emotional toll of losing his partner, all converged at once. The heart monitor attached to Ethan began to spike, then waver. He had held on, risking his own life, to share one final moment with Rocky. Now that moment was over. The lines on the monitor flattened, each beep diminishing into a solitary hum. Within minutes, despite their desperate attempts, Ethan's body failed. He was gone too. Silence crushed the air out of the exam room, a gravity so intense it rooted everyone to the floor. No one can change, both man and dog, crossing the threshold of life within moments of each other. A tearful hush came over the rescue team and the veterinary staff as they realized what had just transpired. In years of life or death rescues, they had witnessed tragedies, but never something so achingly beautiful and profoundly sad. One of the nurses, her voice shaking, placed Ethan's limp hand gently atop Rocky's motionless body. It was a final gesture, a symbolic vow that they remained together, even in death. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she did so. Dr. Collins removed his stethoscope from around his neck and set it aside. His arms felt leaden, his chest heavy with grief. He said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. The bond that had defined Ethan and Rocky's existence for 12 years had carried them beyond. Word of this dual passing spread through Mammoth with surprising speed. The mountains, usually indifferent to human sorrow, seemed to bow their heads under a slate-gray sky. Climbers, skiers, locals, everyone who had ever heard of the heroic duo, stopped to reflect on what they meant to the community. That evening, phone lines hummed with calls, and social media channels lit up with tributes. Small memorials began popping up around town. A single dog collar hung on the door of the rescue station, a candle burning bright outside the vet clinic. The avalanche rescue team shared pictures of Ethan and Rocky from happier times, the two standing side by side atop a snowbank, the wind ruffling Rocky's ears, Ethan's gloved hand and gently patting the dog's back. Local news outlets interviewed tearful townspeople who recalled being rescued by the pair. A woman recounted, she was pinned beneath a fallen tree, and it was Rocky who sniffed her out, barking furiously until Ethan and the others arrived. The avalanche rescue station organized a candlelight vigil on the very night news of Ethan's passing was confirmed. People gathered on the main street, holding flickering candles against the crisp winter air. Snow drifted down silently, like tears from the heavens, as they bowed their heads in collective remembrance. A week later, a formal memorial service was held at the Mammoth Avalanche Rescue Station, exactly where Ethan had led missions for so many years, and where Rocky had waited patiently for the next call. The main hall was draped with black and white bunting, and a framed photograph dominated the center of the stage. Ethan, tall, bright-eyed, wearing the standard bright orange rescue jacket, and Rocky, alert and ready, sitting at his side with ears perked, as though awaiting the next command. The entire building smelled of pine wreaths and fresh flowers, offerings from locals who poured in to pay their respects. On a table stood a gleaming bronze plaque that read, "For the love of comradeship that transcended life and death, Ethan and Rocky, Mammoth heroes." A hush fell over the crowd as the ceremony began. The rescue team captain approached the microphone, voice tight with grief. He recounted their final mission, the avalanche that had buried half a dozen skiers. Ethan and Rocky had found them, valiantly digging through howling wind and swirling snow. In that chaos, a section of ice broke free, striking them both. Even then, they continued to search until they collapsed from injuries and cold. Tears shimmered in the eyes of everyone present as the captain continued, describing how the pair had also been mentors to younger recruits, man and dog equally wise. Rocky had an uncanny ability to sense the best approach for a search, and Ethan excelled at instilling discipline and confidence in novices. They had left a legacy of knowledge and passion that no one would ever forget. At the close of the service, the mayor of Mammoth announced plans for a statue to be erected near the station's entrance, a life-sized bronze sculpture depicting Ethan kneeling beside Rocky, as they might have appeared while waiting for the next call. The project would take months to complete, but the entire town was already contributing to the design. The mayor's voice trembled as he concluded, "Their story reminds us that true love and loyalty can transcend any boundary, even the boundary between life and death." As twilight fell over Mammoth, the mountain peaks glowed with the final rays of the setting sun. The station's flags fluttered at half-mast, and a gentle snow began to fall. In that subdued hush, it was as though the entire town collectively exhaled, holding close the knowledge that they had lost two guardians. Yet the memory of Ethan and Rocky would forever remain a guiding light, an eternal testament to the power of faithfulness and sacrifice. If the story touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to help us bring you more powerful stories like this. Share this video with people who believe in the power of loyalty, courage, and love, because some stories deserve to be remembered forever.